Welcome everybody to another episode of the Beyond Terrain podcast. I am your host, Liev Dalton. We have a very special episode for you today, and if you are new around here, consider following the show or subscribing if you are listening on YouTube. And if you like what we do, please give us a like, a share, a comment, a rating or a review. These are all fantastic ways to help support the show and allow us to grow to get this message out to more people. If you would like to support Beyond Terrain further, you should consider joining the Academy. This is the #1 place to learn about terrain-based principles, from the true root causes of disease to actionable natural healing principles, considerations when you detoxify and rejuvenate your body. We discuss the role of symptoms, the truth about parasites, spirituality, psychology, and everything in between. This is truly a terrain-based approach to unlearning and relearning from the ground up, considering nature, the creator, and the truth. There's written content, video lectures, live sessions, community support, and an essence of meaning, responsibility, sovereignty, and longevity. Sign on for the year and you'll gain access to 2 Catalyst consultation calls where we can dive deep into mapping your terrain to create the most meaningful roadmap for you. For more attuned, one-on-one attention, do not hesitate to reach out. Email me or click the link down below. But without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Forward to a great chat today. Got a few different topics. You've been talking about many things. I obviously talk about really interesting things. You go back in history, you kind of debunk a few of the more modern things. I'd love to maybe dive into a few of these topics. In the preamble there, you kind of took a drink from a copper mug. I'd love to maybe start there. Why do you drink out a copper mug? I've recently been hearing people discuss how copper might be toxic. Vitamin A might be toxic. Would love to start with copper. What are your thoughts on copper? You're drinking out a copper mug. Obviously, you must feel positive about it in some way, right?
Definitely. So, copper it gets attacked on social media. It's funny. I just
Yeah.
had a lady who was putting up all this stuff about how you shouldn't drink from copper. And she was saying that if you drink from copper, it's going to poison you. And I said, well, what about the copper pipes that are in every home across America and the EU and the UK and all the other different places? And then she had really no response. So it's, this is the issue that we deal with. And then it was also the medical medium, that guy who always promotes a lot of funny stuff with viruses and bacteria and all the other stuff. And he also said not to drink out of copper. And he also said not to eat eggs because they contain copper. So, we get a lot of attacks on copper. And it's very strange to me because when you look at the buildings of the past, they all had copper pipes. And that was to keep the water nice and beautiful and structured. And those copper pipes also protected all of the water from the radio frequencies that are all around us, all these cell phone towers, the 5G, all this nonsense that they keep putting out. So what they started doing was the government started putting chemicals through the water supply that would corrode the copper pipes. And then someone would say, "Oh, I'm being poisoned by my pipes." But they don't realize they're being poisoned by the chemicals, which is eating holes into their pipes. And then that would switch them to DuPont plastic. And you think about it, when hot water runs through plastic, you get the vinyl chloride chemical that goes through there. So people are bringing in this vinyl chloride chemical, this PVC, all of this instead when they used to bring in copper. And when you look into the benefits of copper, you get into healing the brain, you get into your skin, you get into your hairs, your nails, your connective tissues. This is why copper was, used so much back in the 1900s. And then once plastic started getting pushed heavily by DuPont, they started saying, well, you don't got to work with copper anymore in your home. You can start using plastic instead. So it gets attacked, and it's wild because when I got into gardening too with copper and electroculture, you watch plants go absolutely bananas using copper in the garden because you're not putting iron or rust into your garden. So if you think about it, same thing going into your body, it's a boost. And that's why I'm always drinking from copper. And then when you get into wearing copper, so you get like tensor rings. So this is like Slim Sperling's tensor rings. He was using these for inflammation, pain, and brain fog. And this is why people wear, necklaces. They wear different types of earrings. They wear different types of wristbands and all these things. Each thing complements the meridian lines of the body. And so when you think about this, when you attack something and you just go after it, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And a lot of the times they will say, "Oh, the copper will get you," or the this will get you. But in reality, we need copper, just like we need gold, just like we need all the other beautiful things that come into our body. But yeah, that's kind of copper in a nutshell. And they've been drinking out of copper with Ayurvedic medicine since the dawn of time. So I will go with them rather than everything we are told in today in 2025.
Fine. I think you bring up some really amazing points, especially like this big confounding variable of, oh, well, we have copper pipes and copper toxicity, but it's confounded by sort of things that we're putting in the water. You know what I mean? That's corroding the pipe. So maybe, copper seems like it's like one of these things. This might be present in water, if you have copper pipes, but then we're ignoring the big confounding variable, which is the direct toxicity that's going into the water. Obviously, they treat water like crazy now. um, I think that's an important thing to consider. I mean, it's the same story when we talk about germs being at the site of disease, parasites, viruses, all these things, right, are used as scapegoats. We're trying to blame sort of things that are good for us rather than the actual toxicity, rather than the actual terrain. I'm curious about your thoughts on the energetics of water, and we last time in our last episode, it was a phenomenal episode. I'd urge the listener to go back and check it out after this one, or maybe pause right now, go back and listen and come back. I found it really interesting when we were talking about electroculture and the electrical properties of copper, like you were alluding to in your garden. This is something that I did, that my mom started doing, and literally the gardens go bananas. It's unbelievable. It's amazing what happens, truly. I'm curious about the energetics of even water running through a copper pipe. It must be beneficial not only for shielding EMF, but in some sort of, increase in the energy. I think of Masaru Emoto, I think of Veda Austin, how energy truly affects not the structure, the composition of water on a deeper level than just maybe the solutes and, the minerals inside of water.
So this is a deep one because when I started getting into drinking out of copper, I started also getting into drinking out of uranium glass, which they'll tell you, stay away from that one. I also started getting into cobalt glass, which they'll tell you to stay away from that. And I started getting into all this interesting bohemian glassware or depression glass or carnival glass. That's what it was called. And each thing would imbue a property into the water. So exactly what you just said, when you have that copper and it's sitting in the copper, it's protecting it, and then it's also increasing the energy of the water. And now we drink out of plastic, which makes no sense whatsoever. And you start to think about how you're changing the okay. So the best way to describe it, the more I've been studying into this deeper that I keep going into the ether, is copper is one of the few materials that Nikola Tesla talked about, which would harness the ether. It would actually gather a charge when he was messing around with the ether and wireless energy. And he noticed that he could see a charge sitting on copper. And so if you think about it that way with electroculture, with your water, you're gaining a charge. And that's kind of what we're missing. Everything is electricity, everything is a charge. Even our plants, they're gathering charges every day. Every day lightning is striking somewhere and they're gathering charges. And what it's doing is it's harnessing that. And then also, when you get into copper, it's tapping into noble gases. So there was a guy named Dmitry Mendelov, who was a Russian scientist, who discovered all these noble gases, which were lighter than hydrogen. And there were all these different ones: newtonium, kryptonium, there's tons of them. And when you get into electroculture, what I realize is it's tapping into that. And so same with your copper, that's what you're beginning to tap into. But when you look into Victor Schauberger's work with copper as well, he had pipes that were curved, and they would spiral like an antelope, the horn of an antelope. And what happened was as that water would spiral, it would defy science, which is funny because it would levitate as it would spin. So you can imagine what you're doing for your water. And then also, like we were talking about, the energetic principle. And that's what Victor Schauberger was big on. He would take water, he would put it through different copper vessels and brass vessels, and he would make it spin because he said this is what water is supposed to do. Like when you think about it, water is supposed to spiral. Like it's not supposed to go in straight lines. Us building in straight lines makes no sense. Everything curves. You get into nature, everything's always spiraling and curving. So when I've gotten into this, what I've realized is if you're watering your plants, you should use a copper watering can. And they used to have the curve just like this, that when you would go to pour the water would spiral as it came out. Now you think about all the watering cans that we have today, they're all in a straight line. And water doesn't move in a straight line. So when you pour it, the water is losing its energy. And so the more I've gone into like the water structuring devices, which are all over the internet, people are like, I got all these things. Or like the wands, where they're just I think amalama wands or whatever it is. That's just, all you're doing is you're stirring. You're creating the spin factor. So same thing with the
Yeah.
copper. That's what you're starting to bring back. But you're also going into, you get into alchemy, you get into transmutation, you get into all these things which we just don't learn about. Because after the 1920s, when the Rockefellers bought out the educational system, they got rid of alchemy. Alchemy was taught in every single school that you went into. Kids would learn alchemy and they'd understand that certain things can be transmuted into another thing. And this is just basic, simple science. And then once that kind of went away, then all this stuff that me and you are talking about now is considered woo woo. And then if you start talking about it, you were a quack or a sorcerer or something, whatever it was. So that's kind of, in my opinion, when you get into copper and you get into the water and you get into the vibration, the frequency, the energy, all of that's all connected. And this is why when people drink out of copper, they get all jacked up with energy, because you're charging all of the electrical cells in your body, because that's what you are, electricity walking around at all times until they zap you back to life, when you're not here right now.
Yeah, it's easy to dismiss these things, because they've been dismissed consistently throughout history, like even the concept of a structured water, the intelligence of water, etc. You saw it dismissed with the Russians and it was just communist science. And then you saw it come back and then now we do see, you know, esteemed scientists discussing this structured water concept, and it's really, really amazing. And it encapsulates this essence that you're discussing that the alchemists understood, right? That the our ancestors understood the importance of the energy of our realm, the electricity of our bodies. This it's not all that far off. If you go beyond biology and chemistry at all, you realize, if you're studying chemistry, even in the most modern way possible, it's still all electricity, and we overlook that. When people start looking into healing themselves and they're stuck, often this electrical component, this conduction component is overlooked completely. Yeah, I think that's a big problem. And I'm glad that you brought alchemy up. That's a really important thing for anyone to learn, at least the basic hermetic principles. I think they're phenomenal. They informed the Beyond Train. They informed the work here. They informed, so much of my knowledge, and obviously it informed a little bit of yours as well. How'd you learn about alchemy? When did you first hear about it? What was your kind of introduction to that?
So I was looking into David Hudson, and he was talking about Ormus. And David Hudson was this Arizona miner who was mining all this land up in northern Arizona. And what he
Yeah.
noticed was is he could take dirt and turn it into gold. And then once he turned dirt into gold, he learned that he could take gold and turn it into ormus. And ormus is this liquid that defies the traditional science, because what happens is when you take gold and you heat it up to basically a superheated level, let's say 20,000 degrees, just to make it simple. When you heat it to that level, gold will actually vanish, like completely gone, like as if it was not there, and then it will come back. And it would come back as this fine powdered substance. And he noticed that when people would consume this fine powdered substance, that their brain would get turned on, they'd get all charged up, like almost like they just consumed the electrical properties of gold. So what he decided to do was he decided to have gardeners decide to take this stuff and sprinkle it all over the garden. And they started getting walnuts the size of oranges. And this was right here in Arizona. So like all these things start to happen. But yeah, alchemy is just, you're getting into understanding how you can take one thing and turn it into another. Also, too, when you get into gold, people are like, well, where does all this gold come from? We're mining it. Well, when you start to learn that you can take lead and turn it into gold through a chemical process, then you really don't run out of something, because you just take one thing and then turn it into another. So alchemy actually gets rid of the scarcity mindset that we've been put into. And then when you get into the whole transmuting of your body, well, a simple thing of transmuting your body is eating food. When you go to eat something, you go to consume the energetic principle in it, and it goes into your body. alchemy then takes place, and then a change begins to happen. This has been my whole thing with herbs and understanding herbalism and testing all these herbs and putting herbs into my body and understanding what happens when I use them, because it's alchemy and you're just changing and transmuting. This is why somebody will take one herb and they'll be like, oh my gosh, my energy's all charged up. Or they'll take another herb and it'll put them to sleep, because it's the same thing that's happening. But I went through a whole rabbit hole of this when I discovered Ormus. And then also when I went up to the Copper Museum in Clarksdale, Arizona, they showed books of the schools having alchemy. And this whole museum is based on copper. And I thought, someone knows something, because, it takes a long time to get the copper out and mine it out and everything else and all that work. And I thought, what happens if you could get rid of that? And this is where I went into an old world book from the 1890s to the 1900s, where they were talking about taking carbon, just like charcoal, and turning it into diamonds. And then I thought, wow, well, that scarcity thing kind of just went out the window. You got people mining and doing all that, but you could just do that. And that's what I started to realize, is we live in so many lies of things, of like, it takes this and to do this. When in reality, the more I've learned with, Tesla and ether and electroculture and all these things, it's all abundant. That's what it is. And it's just, we've been put into a mindset to make it believe that it's not.
Yeah, scarcity. That was one of the main topics of our last episode together. Again, like go back and listen to it because it was phenomenal. This like we don't live in a scarce realm. That's one of the biggest indoctrinations we've all received, is that everything is scarce. So it puts us into the systems. It puts us into this modern way of life that doesn't serve humanity as a whole at the basis. So I'm really curious. We've been talking a lot about some certain maybe words we shouldn't say, although we're going to discuss them in a way that the modern world will probably like. The old ivermectin, if I can say that. Maybe this will get taken off YouTube. That's fine. People will be able to find it anyways. But we're going to talk about it probably in the same way that the modern people are going to talk about it. We don't really like ivermectin. I'm really curious about your thoughts on it. Where does it come from? Why are people so obsessed with it? Where do we start this discussion off? Tell us.
So this is a deep rabbit hole, and this is people having faith in a system that has been poisoning them since 1626, which is the boosters, so for people to look into. People have been being boosted since 1626, so they've been being poisoned since 1626 by the system. And basically this whole thing with the mectins and the fenbens and all of this is just another playbook. That's all it is. They know that people aren't going to put boosters into their body anymore because they realize that they're going to be poisoned if they take that stuff. But now they'll take something else. And it's so wild that when I went down the rabbit hole of the same companies who make the boosters are the same companies who make the mectins and the fenbens and all of that. So you got Merck on one side, which is the company, and then you got Merck on the other side. And the word Merck is an interesting word because that has a connotation to it. So if you think about it, that's what's taking place. So a lot of people, they've gotten obsessed with this. The parasites are going to get them, and the parasites are this, and the parasites are that. And what they don't realize is they have a heavy metal overload in their body from all the toxins and pesticides and plastics and polymers and everything that they keep putting into their body. Then they go to take this pill, which is suppressing the symptoms, which it always does. Then they end up with liver issues and all types of other issues, because that's usually how it goes. And then they don't start to understand the whole thing with the worms. What I've started to realize, since contagion is fake, and it's nothing's jumping all over to get me or anything else. What I've started to realize with contagion being fake, it also means that worms are not jumping all over to get people as well. It's what you do to your body. So if you have a bunch of heavy metals, if you have a bunch of decaying tissue, if you have a whole bunch of toxins in your body will produce the worms to eat the decaying tissue, the toxins, the metals, all of this. So what people think is, if I just attack my body, that's what they're doing, with this mectin or this fenben or whatever it may be, they think, well, now I'm solved. Well, you never got rid of the toxicity. So all you're doing is you're suppressing the symptoms, and then over a prolonged period of time going to have the same issue. I had one lady, she had tumors, and so she started taking this, and she goes, well, the tumor went away. Then she goes to find out 6 months later, she's covered in tumors. They're popping out all over the place. What happened was she suppressed the symptoms, and then now the tumors keep coming back because she never fixed the root cause. And this is the problem. is people hop on, I hate to say alternative media, and they see all of this, and you got all these influencers pumping this, and even Rumble, like Rumble has advertisements, and it's like, get your pills here. And it's like, okay, so this is the same thing. You're just getting another pill from another, pharmaceutical company that's just giving you another poison that's just doing the exact same thing. And then there's the whole thing about the safety thing, which is mind blowing. People are like, it's so safe. You go read the side effects of this stuff, like liver failure, your eyes turning yellow, jaundice, all these things. That's not safe. Every animal they give it to is poisoned. Every amphibian they give it to is dead. So you get there and go, that's not really safe. Safe is wormwood, like just natural wormwood, like the just beautiful herb, something from nature. So, this whole thing, it got me. I've done lots of videos and I always get attacked. People are like, oh my gosh, you're against us. And I'm like, I'm just showing you're falling for the same playbook. And there's a document people can look into. It shows it all. Like it's so obvious. Operation Lockstep by the Rockefeller Foundation. They show that they will have a pandemic, they will have solutions, they will implement digital IDs, they will do the whole thing that they're doing, and it's all written out there. And then they would have a solution, but people wouldn't trust the solution, so they'd go back to this one instead. And that's all people are doing. It's a $34 billion industry of making people believe that worms are getting them, when in reality, they're not looking at what they are doing on the daily basis, which is causing, I hate to say it, all of their health issues. And I've realized that's how all health issues are. It's what you do to your body. And if we add one more thing in there, I've been doing raw meat now for 7 months straight, eating raw meat every single day. It is not cooked. It is fresh. It is raw. I had 5 pieces before we did this live right now. I'm still here. I'm not covered in worms. I'm not poisoned. I'm not anything. If anything, I got so much energy, I don't know what to do with myself anymore. So that's pretty much what's happening. And if people want to look into that, they can look into Ajanos in the book We Want to Live. He was the one who inspired me on that. And when he said about how we can eat raw meat and not have any issues, it blew my mind. And he said how all the studies were faked so that they could sell you pills. And that's kind of what we just kind of discussed all in a nutshell.
One of the biggest scams in the alternative health world, something that boils my blood, is parasites. What if everything that we're told about parasites is completely wrong, down to their name being a misnomer? My new ebook, The Truth About Parasites, dives deep into the untold story about parasites, why most parasite cleansing can actually be extremely harmful for your health, and what the true role of parasites are from a terrain-based perspective. How they might actually be healing the body rather than hindering a process. This is a complete re-examination of the narrative that we've been sold about parasites, and it extends to germ theory, disease, detox, all rooted, of course, in logic, terrain-based healing, ancestral wisdom, science, and the essence of nature. We examine over 75 contagion papers. There are hundreds of references in this book, as well as actionable steps for nature-based healing. For $11, you cannot go wrong. This book, as well as an additional 10 lectures, are available in the Beyond Terrain Academy as well, complimentary, of course. So if you want increased value, that's where you want to go. But let's get back to the episode.
It's the exact same science. The safe and effective methodology works for all of these things. Like the way that they set up the experiment, there's no actual scientific method. They don't actually use controls, and they don't look at all the markers. Like they don't, even with the injections, they're not looking at cancer, autoimmune, or eczema. They're not looking at any of those things. They're looking at adverse effects. So you take it, and if in 8 weeks, you don't have any severe symptoms, they're going to say safe and effective. And still, if you do have severe symptoms in the 8 weeks, they just kind of, a little outlier, like they just kind of zhush it to the side, right? It's the way that these studies are designed. They're designed in such a way that you get the results that you want. So you have your peer-reviewed literature, which is a problem in itself, and it's just a means to pump these things out, right? It's the same story over and over again.
And if
I
I
think that's
may
amazing.
interject, they also use
Please.
a PCR test. So
Mm.
they just basically say anything that they want because PCR tests have a 99.9% error rate. You just get to tell people. And when you go through all the 1,000 diseases that they diagnose people with, they use a PCR test. So here's a great one. Person takes ivermectin and they go to take the PCR test and they have this alleged illness at first. They go to take the second PCR test and now they say, oh, guess what? It must have worked. The PCR test now says I don't have it anymore. So this is what we are facing. I mean, they tested, people don't realize in 2020, but fruit, pawpaw fruits were coming up with the illness of 2020 with PCR tests. A fruit was coming up with an illness. A can of Coca-Cola was coming up with the illness. So this is what we have to be aware of. So when people are saying, "Oh, well, it did this," my results are clear. Yeah, your results are clear because they're skewed. That's what it is. So I just wanted to add that in because that was the one when I was like, okay, got you.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And we've talked about PCR. I mean, you could go listen to our episodes with Dr. Yernea Tomzik, who's a molecular biologist, PhD. She dismantled PCR from the start. It's a very subjective method. When you even look at how you go to set up a PCR test, the way that you can cancel noise makes the entire thing subjective. We talked about that with Jamie Andrews. I mean, the start to finish, not beyond cycle thresholds, which is a whole problem in and of itself. And I know I'm throwing out big words, so go learn about PCR if you're interested. But it just the way that you set it up. Again, science, the methods used are created in such a way to get the desired results. And it's the same. We're seeing this with supplement companies as well as pharmaceutical companies. They use the same methods. So even when you get into the kind of the natural side of things, the natural supplements, that's a bigger industry, first of all, than pharmaceutical ones. And obviously, it depends how you define supplement. Something that's a whole food is not necessarily a supplement, although you might be supplementing your diet in a way. I think we're getting to semantics here, but whole foods aren't supplements. But when you think about something like methylene blue or peptides or all of these natural things, we're still kind of in the same realm. It's just greenwashed. Any thoughts on that?
That's exactly what I was going to say. I looked up who made all the peptides. It's Ambio. So pharmaceuticals, that's the same thing. So people are like, I'm doing peptides. You're doing the same exact thing. You're just not taking vitamins, which most people don't realize that the first vitamins were created by the Rockefellers. He paid a fellow named Casimir Funk. People can look into this in 1912, and he created the first vitamins. And it's funny because the first vitamins were coming from yeast, like a nutritional yeast. That was what the whole branding was. Get your yeast. And it's like, why would I eat dead yeast? Like that's refortified with B vitamins and it'll heal you and whatever. So yeah, all the vitamin stuff, I mean, you're just getting into the same, pharmaceutical companies. You get Merck, you get Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, that whole thing. So yeah, it's the old bait and switch. You're not taking those anymore. So now we got injectables because now we got to inject you in a different way. Or how about this? You inject yourself, which makes no sense. And then you go into methylene blue. This is the deep one. Just go into Google, type in Rockefeller Institute methylene blue, and you find the guy who created chemo. That's what it all started with, chemo. And they were using this dye, that's what they said, to find the alleged parasites and the alleged illness that was in the body. They were saying that once they dye the body, they can then find it. Now, that dye poisons the body. That's what happens. There's tons of side effects of the dopamine messed up, serotonin things, all these things. People's brains turning blue, all kinds. And so they use the same tactic, and now they're selling it to people. And then you got people like RFK and all these people who are putting it in their drinks, and they're like, this is new. So for somebody who's against the establishment, using the same things as the establishment doesn't make any sense. And like I said, this is a simple Google search. Like you just go to Google, Rockefeller Institute, and it comes down. And this is where I started to look in all that. And they were saying the best was they were saying they were using methylene blue to dye the parasites to find them. And when I looked up the pictures of this, of the little dots that were the alleged parasites, I go, if I just take ink and throw it on a paper, I could say it's anything too. This is like nicotine receptors. It's the same exact thing. All of these things follow the same, like you said, it's like somebody wrote out a playbook and they just said, we're going to follow this step, then we're going to do this, then we're going to get some medical people, and then we're going to put it on, the internet, then we're going to do some ads, and then it'll sell. And it just keeps repeating through that. So the methylene blue, the peptides, all the creatine, collagen, It's all the same stuff. The first protein powders came from soy powders, like turned into protein to say you need more protein. Like, just eat food. That's what I've learned. Eat food, superfoods, natural things. Stick to nature. Nature will not poison you, and it's not going to give you some weird side effects. Which then you need to go back to the system that you're trying to avoid, so that you're a patient now for life, which is the same thing always.
If you want to have the best whey protein shake of your life, take some raw milk, put it
Yes.
on the counter, let it separate. You're going to get a double whammy here, by the way. Double whammy. Most healing thing you can do. Let it sit on your counter, strain the cheese, keep the whey, because that's pure protein. You're also going to be getting beneficial bacteria, microzyma. You're getting absolutely everything that you need, not just some sort of, isolated whey powder. You get everything that you need. You drink that way, and then you have cheese, raw, unsalted cheese. Let that sit, let it hang for a couple days, strain it as much as you can. And raw, unsalted cheese, like Agitus speaks about, like you were mentioning earlier, is one of the most detoxing things for your body. It acts like the best binder, and not a binder like zeolite, and not a binder like these synthetic things. It will pull everything that you need out and keep the rest because it's natural. It's whole food. We're not talking about something that's synthetic. We're not consuming rocks. We're talking about a whole food. Double whammy, best thing you could probably do for your health. Let that sit on the counter. Then you got two healing foods. I love that. Um, there's
And
so much here. Go
if,
ahead,
if
please.
I may add, the isolation thing is funny because when I was looking into amino acids and how
Yeah.
amino acids were isolated and found, they were found in asparagus. Are we asparagus? Like, I'm not an asparagus. I'm a human. So how can you find something like the whole science, the whole thing, all amino acids all stem from people allegedly putting chemicals on asparagus and then being like, that's your glycine. And you sit there and go, okay, so what about in the human body? And this is the fun part, is like you said, with the isolation of even proteins and this, even pasteurized products. I've gone down the rabbit hole of pasteurized products and the chemicals they put in there, the chalk, the temperature they use. All of these things are all added in. And it's like, well, if you're isolating something like vitamin C, you have to put 55 chemicals to find that vitamin C. But then you have to think also too, if you absorb that, aren't you absorbing those 55 chemicals? So I
Mhm.
would rather just eat an orange peel. And I didn't mean to interject, but the
Please.
isolation popped in as soon as you said it, and I thought people have to be aware of that 25-step process to isolate something rather than just drinking, like you said, raw milk or eating raw cheese.
Yeah. Yeah, no, phenomenal interjection. I mean, that's perfect. The whole thing about isolation, isolation does not exist in nature. So right there, you have a fundamental flaw with empiricism, which we've discussed, on my side of things, that when you try to isolate a variable, you're assuming that something that is isolated acts the same as it does in the body. And even that it exists in the body, like even vitamins, for example, to get vitamin C, you have to add lead acetate. That's the first ingredient. And again, 25-step process, add all of these chemicals, none of which are controlled for. How do you know that the vitamin C in your test tube resembles anything like the body, right? And just because you give it to a person and symptoms go away doesn't mean that it's acting the same as the body. It's still symptom suppression. Even with these synthetic vitamins, like we just figured out kind of a drug in a way, and we found that it reduced symptoms, right? So it's like the same concepts, like these isolations and the alterations of these things. So even something like peptides, people are like, oh, well, it's natural, right? Peptides are natural. I'll inject peptides. We have peptides in our body. To they're not just peptides. They attach them to fatty acid chains and different molecules to force it into the body, to force the body to use it. Like, you're not just having peptides. Like, peptides just aren't isolated pure peptides. They add all these different things and manipulate it in such a way for the body to be able to use it to get this certain effect. But it's still not the natural peptide that the body uses. Similar to glutathione, you know, isolated glutathione. If you take it in like a supplement pill form, your body's just going to digest it. and you're not going to actually get glutathione in your body. So what they do is they put it in this fat cell, like this fat little vesicle, so that your body absorbs it, and they force your body to take it up, right? And how do they create the glutathione? Again, you're looking at a lot of steps, a lot of isolation, a lot of toxic chemicals are being used to produce these isolates. Even though it might start with an orange, you end with a white powder that you call vitamin C that cures scurvy if you give it to someone with scurvy. Doesn't mean that that's the same. It's the same pharma science.
Yeah.
Anything
And that's
resonate
the
there?
same as whey protein today on Google. They just announced is loaded with heavy metals. And you sit there and go, you just described it, why it's loaded with heavy metals. And this is another ploy. They're going to try to say everything has heavy metals, which it does actually. Everything does contain some form of metal because there's metal all over the earth. Like it does exist. So, but like you said, people have to be aware of this and the processing and this. And vitamin C, largest holders of vitamin C, the little emergency packets, that's Pfizer. So this is why the vitamins, this is what people don't realize. This is why vitamins never get targeted. If you talk about herbs, they're coming after you, kicking in your door, whatever it may be, censoring you, blocking you, whatever. But if you promote vitamins and all the stuff that they want to be promoted, it never gets targeted. And Eustace Mullins, in his book, Murder by Injection, which is probably one of the best books ever written on just the whole system itself, just by the keyword of the title, Murder by Injection. But he explained all of that. In the 1960s and 70s, they were going into people's houses, like grandmothers who were selling herbal tonics and kicking in their doors with SWAT teams to go after them for selling oregano oil. Like they were making a little oregano tincture. But vitamins or poisons or boosters, whatever, right to the people. And this is because when you look at who owns those companies, like people go, I buy vitamins from this company. They have to buy the raws from the original pharmaceutical company. Like they have to get it from there. That's how it's made. It's made by these companies, and then they sell them back, and it's all this whole thing. So people have to be aware, and like you said, just stick to food. Like food will just heal you. That's it. Like it's that simple. We don't have to make it so complicated and break it down into I'm low in this and I'm low in that. And that's the other rabbit hole. Blood work. People go for blood work. They get some blood work done. Well, guess what? Your blood changes like every 3 minutes. So if you get your blood work done now, your blood work's different then. And since, like you were just saying, you don't know what vitamin C is, you don't know what vitamin D and all of these other ones, how do you test for something then? You just make up numbers and then you tell people. I mean, I had one lady who reached out who said she was suffering from mold issues, which is just she's got heavy metals in her body. And she was suffering from mold issues. And the professional she went to just gave her 50 vitamins. And I thought, well, what is that going to do? Vitamin C, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K, and I thought, that's the goofiest thing I've ever heard. You're just doing the same thing. You're not fixing the problem. So same with blood work, same with all of this. People have to question all of this. And that's why I said it's a perpetual loop to keep people intertwined in this system so that they don't feel they have the power to leave this system. But even for myself, I haven't gone to professionals in 15 years. I'm still here. I'm standing. I got more energy than the professionals who are trying to preach these things. So you just sit there and go, I don't think you know what you're talking about. And it's better that we admit that. It's better that we see that and go, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, I think you're lying to me, than to sit there and keep going to the lies and going through the system and then being their patient for life, whether it's testosterone, HRT, peptides, vitamins, blood work, the whole ordeal.
I hope that you guys are enjoying the episode so far. Don't forget to leave that like, comment, rating, or review. Make sure to subscribe and follow the show as well. And if you really love what we do, I'm telling you, the Beyond Terrain Academy is the place you want to be. It is the last stop. No more gurus, no more trends, no more hype. Just simplicity, a return to nature. That's what the true terrain-based approach is all about. I have taken everything that I have learned from studying the terrain and beyond, speaking to the giants of the field, to people in many different healing modalities, rooting it in simplicity, returning to the fundamentals, returning to nature, distilling it all into easily digestible content for you to be able to apply it to your life, to allow yourself to become the best version of yourself. Full Academy members gain access to master classes, the Terrain Wellness Club with no other but Jacob Diaz and myself, live Q&A and discussion calls, the Terrain Studies library to dive deeper into the literature, deep dive classrooms on parasites, symptoms, and so much more. We have community discussion forums, a group of individuals who are all grounded in the terrain. Don't forget, when you sign on for the year, you gain access to 2 Catalyst consultation calls where we can map out your entire terrain, internal, external, and create a meaningful roadmap for you to do the deep work to get achievable long-term results. But let's get back to the episode.
Let's not forget PCR's best friend, serology, antibody tests, which are just as unreliable as PCR, if not worse. It's just totally random. We think that antibodies are specific, but they're not. They've never been demonstrated to be. Maybe they are in the body, but we've never demonstrated that fact in a laboratory at all. Any control experiments, again, don't do it justice. So again, when you're doing that blood work, you're still relying on these methods that are problematic to determine your blood, which is just a snapshot. Even something like a hair mineral analysis test, I've been listening to some people that say, even that, I mean, you can see that there might be increased metals in your hair, but it doesn't necessarily give you the whole picture of metals in each organ and each tissue and your blood. And, so you're still missing the whole picture of the body. You'd have to do a biopsy of every single organ in your body to really get a whole picture. But then again, you're still only getting a snapshot, and then a biopsy is such an invasive thing, like it's like we're just missing the point here. It's not, we're so far from natural medicine, even in the alternative health world. We don't adhere to the true principles of naturopathy. Even the concept of heavy metals, you hear about heavy metals in spring water or salt or whatever, like even like a herb, like because plants do sometimes have heavy metals. Now, it's a problem if you're cultivating turmeric in a mass format, uh, adhering to the modern agricultural ways, and there's not good soil microbiology, you're not using biodynamic principles, you're not wild foraging these things. Heavy metals then become a problem when, again, we stray from nature, or if your spring is contaminated with heavy metals from mining or smithing or metal work. That's different than naturally occurring heavy metals, like heavy metals in fish. Even Agenus did an experiment. You consume raw tuna and you will absorb far less heavy metals than you do if you consume cooked tuna. Interesting observation. But still, are the metals the same in a natural source, in a natural quantity, than these industrial, what's coming from our exhausts? So like there's a level, because these are natural things. It's just the quantities, the balance is totally out of whack. That's just been something I've been on recently, because you hear about people demonizing salt or spring water or whatever it is, and unless it's a contamination, I don't believe that it's a problem. When it's in the natural quantities, we don't got to worry about it. You know what I mean? I'm sure that
Well, and
resonates to
that
some capacity. Yeah.
and that's the thing too, is like you said, I mean, the pesticides are a big one. People are just, I mean, it's like drinking non-organic coffee. You're just having a cup of hot pesticides, and the heat is actually making it worse, just like you said, because of what a John has talked about. And that's the other thing is, I mean, his rabbit hole on the tuna thing blew my mind, because when I went down the whole canned tuna, every canned tuna that's on the shelf is cooked 2 times and then put into a can, and then it's lined with like a plastic polymer and whatever else. And I was like, this is crazy. So when people are like, I'm getting mercury poisoning, you're getting mercury poisoning because the food is so processed and you're eating it out of this processed way, instead of when you're eating raw, wild caught tuna, you don't have any of those issues. And he said that, like, even the mercury that's in fish is what makes them be able to jump out of the water. That's actually what it does. Think of mercury. When it spins, it creates a
Yeah.
voltage. So he said, like, there's no reason to be afraid of swordfish. And he said that when he got a flu shot. So the reason he got it was when he was in Thailand, they actually pinned him down and stuck him. And that was because he was a threat. Most people don't realize how much of a threat this man was to our entire system that we face today. He was 20 years ahead of everybody, and he was fixing everybody. And he had autism, he had all these issues, and he resolved it all with raw meat and raw milk. But anyways, when he was I think about 55 years old before they took him out. they stuck him. They pinned him down and they stuck him with shots. And what he had to do was he had to go find the local, I think it was like a stingray, because a stingray is high with mercury, and he got raw stingray. And he ate that stingray, and it actually pulled out the toxins and pulled out the metals and the poisons from his body. So, we have been associated with, I got to cook my food till it's well done. I got to cook it and destroy it. Well, what are you cooking it in? You might be cooking it in a cast iron metal pan or whatever it is. So those metals are now being heated and then put into the food. Versus when you're eating raw, like sashimi, steak tartare, beef carpaccio, these meals like this, you're just eating those raw minerals and the raw nutrients. And this was what also blew my mind, which related. When you look up the RDA, which goes into your recommended daily allowance and whatever else, and you look up the proteins, carbs, and fats, even though those could all be fake too. But when you look up all of those numbers, it's based on raw food. It's not based on cooked food. So when people are like, I'm getting 20 grams of protein from a steak, or if I'm getting 10 grams of this from whatever, that's based on raw food, not cooked. So when you cook it, you've now changed it. And then John has talked about when you start to cook things up, what you're doing is you're changing the structure. And then also, since you're cooking in maybe seed oils or whatever else, which is one step away from plastic, you are now crystallizing your body. And that's what basically I've started to realize. Like you said, there are metals that do exist, but there's also the crystallization of your insides. And this is a perfect one too. Think about apple cider vinegar. People use vinegar to take out the hardness, like the calcium buildup off of something. That's why when people consume apple cider vinegar, guess what it's doing? Taking the hardness, the plastics, the polymers, the crystallization out of the body too. Because that's what they're trying to do. They're gunking up our system with all these toxins. And then if they're not, they're trying to inject them into your body. And then you're just building all this toxin. And then you get all stiff and crushed up like this. And you're like, I can't figure out why I got arthritis, and whatever. And it's like, you're built up with all these toxins because you're not bringing in natural things and you're cooking everything so much. And he talked about all of the cultures who weren't cooking their foods are not having any of these issues. It was only until they started cooking, started having these issues. But the whole fish thing, and then people show like the worms and all of that and whatever else. John has talked about he ate that. He literally ate the worms that were in the fish. And he's like, I'm perfectly fine. It's just part of nature. And the best ever document, which there's only a few left on the internet with this, but I remember I found a document on nature.com that says parasites suck the heavy metals out of sharks and they sit on the shark the entire time and they just eat the toxins from their necks. And I thought, so then why are we attacking these things? Why are we saying there's something wrong with this when there is this beautiful, symbiotic relationship between this and that? And we're negating all that. And if you want to laugh, Google has removed a lot of those that talk about foxes, that talk about sharks, that talk about all these things. So on this whole thing, it's like just anything you're sold or told, do the opposite. That's the best way to describe it. That's what I've learned through this whole journey of the last 5 years. Just do the opposite, and you'll probably be fine. That's the best way to describe
And that's not the first time that we've heard that statement, so it's kind of interesting. But that's come up a few times. But obviously, you're hitting the nail on the head here, and it might seem far-fetched, raw food or raw stingray, raw shark. Every single culture from around the world, not just untouched primitive people, but even some more civilized cultures, for lack of better terms. Every single one of them had a raw food meal. Like you talk about the Germans, they had the raw pork and onion sandwich. You talk about carpaccio, you talk about sushi, nigiri, sashimi. In North America, the natives here, they consume plenty of raw fish. They consume plenty of raw meat. They even consumed, not a far-fetched thing at all, spoiled, rotten foods sometimes. And there's a ton of papers, anthropological papers, on people observing tribes just consuming, a rotten rodent even. Our bodies adapt, right? And so now if you were to consume something like that, you would probably have pretty severe detoxification symptoms, and that's what they are, detox symptoms. But, you know, a primitive individual accustomed to nature doesn't get sick from these things because their body's in balance with nature. They adhere to natural principles. They live with nature. They can drink any water from any source and extract the energy and nutrition from the water. Same with food. Us modern people, we're very disconnected from this, and that's why you have symptoms maybe when you consume raw foods. Or I just did a YouTube video diving deep on this topic, but you can look up around the world. Every single culture has, you can even put it into ChatGPT. I got ChatGPT to make me a list. It was like 50 different types of foods, all the traditional names, and exactly what it was, and all had a raw animal component to it. And they'll try to tell you that this is weird. It's only weird in the modern Western world. I mean, realistically speaking, any culture has raw animal food in it. So something to explore. Obviously, I started low and slow. Like you start at a restaurant, or you start, sushi. You just order nigiri or sashimi. Rather than just the avocado roll. You just start slow, and then you're kind of eventually you're just eating ground beef, and it's no big deal. That's where I'm at now.
That's
But
pretty much
you'll
what it
realize
is.
it's very detoxing. Go ahead.
Well, and I was going to say, this is where, if we want to hit another topic, probiotics.
Mm,
Probiotic, who makes all those? The vitamin companies, the pharmaceutical companies. They sell you probiotics. And instead, you could be making your own. You could ferment the milk, the raw milk, or you could ferment the meat, and you can have those beautiful fermentation process. And this is the other thing too. When I would talk about meat and this, people will go, "Oh my gosh, it's rotted." Well, if you think about it, it's actually fermenting. And we have to think
mm,
of like in these terms, like how the body is naturally going to consume something that has fermented. And they used to take the meat and they would put it into the earth and they would let it ferment in the earth. And this was a tactic that was used. So yeah, when you start to sit here and think about this, all these cultures have been doing it. Even raw eggs. People go, "Oh, I'm going to get salmonella." Salmonella is a beneficial bacteria. E. coli is a beneficial bacteria. You are bacteria. So if we eliminate the bacteria with hand sanitizers and chemicals, we eliminate humans and animals. Because, like you said, animals naturally do this. And people will let things ferment, and then it gets even more tasty. This is what I've done tons of experiments with raw meat where I let it ferment, I put it out, I've done air drying, I've done all these different things. When you
mm,
let it ferment, it gets even more tasty. And it's funny because cooking, all you're doing is throwing a bunch of spices on it to try to make it taste better after you cooked it into rubber. But with raw, when you put the seasoning and you do any types of flavors or whatever, it brings it out even more. The fat will naturally marbleize. You don't have to cook it because you're now changing the structure. But like you said, it's like you look at all these cultures and they're all doing it. And then you start to go, well, where did we change? Well, one day Rockefellers came in, said, "I got a stove for you. I got oil, I've got all this, I got stoves for you. You're gonna love that. You don't got to worry about doing that anymore. And then now convenience comes with harming the health over time, and then people are trying to figure it out. And that's why I tried it. It's been 7 months now, and I will continue
wow.
probably for the rest of my life. But I will tell you, I was suffering from a lot of like EMF issues. It's horrible. Like it's horrible to be crippled from EMF issues and things like that. Nothing. You can't. It's like I honestly feel like you feel like a warrior, and I've realized that. And this was just when I would go out into like the store and things like that. Not my house. My house is all zero point 0, with the meter and everything else. It's only when I went into the place and I was like, oh my, this is brutal. Even the lights, this is brutal. But after doing a lot of raw meat and raw milk and realizing this and going, this is so simple. This is so easy. And you save money on your bills for groceries because I realized that when you're cooking everything up, you got to use 2 to 3 times more food because you're cooking it. It's not as much anymore. So you got to just keep eating. And then this led me into one more, which was the raw section. You get into the nuts, you get into your juices, you get into all these products that they sell you at the grocery store. They're all cooked. They're pasteurized. They don't have to say it. But if you don't get organic raw nuts, they've been cooked. They've been steamed. They've been dry roasted. Same with when you get into the different types of things on the grocery shelves and whatever, they've been pasteurized. So this is why when you go to the atypical grocery store, most people are just eating overly processed food. Then they take it home, cook it, and process it again. And then it's like, well, that's why you feel hungry all the time. That's why you feel bloated. That's why you can't gain weight. If a person can't gain weight or muscle or anything like that, it's because there's no nutrients coming in. So instead, like we just said, they sell you protein powders, and all this other stuff and whatever. And that's, this is this perpetual loop. But I just wanted to throw that in there because I thought it was important.
I love that. And to add on, because we did observe anthropologically tribes did cook food, but it wasn't a propane stove. It wasn't a conventional oven, right? It was fire, right? And when you got the convenience of the stove, you lost the flame. And there's the certain amount of healing light that comes from that. So even if you were cooking food, you were getting the energy from the fire. I mean, we've lost touch completely, and again, like there were methods to maybe curb the effect. They also didn't have to worry about EMFs. They didn't have to worry about metals kind of spraying down on us. There were so many things to consider, right? And the answer always comes back to nature. And I think the underlying thing here is what matters most is the terrain, right? A parasite doesn't cause issues only if the terrain is toxic, deficient, diseased. Does it cause issues? And this is a lot across the board. Same with mold. Mold in nature, fungus in nature, fine. Put it on a building material full of formaldehyde and heavy metals and toxic chemicals, and then the mold becomes a problem, right? It's the same with bacteria. It's the same even with the nutrients, right? Like the vitamins and all these things, like a vitamin in an orange is not the same as one that's been altered in a lab, right? Minimizing the process, getting closer with your food, getting back to nature. I think we would agree on all of this. Matt, this has been an amazing episode. What do we leave the listener with?
Well, like you said, don't be afraid of mold because mold is spores and spores are everywhere. And then spores equal pollen. So how can you be afraid of mold if they're all the same thing? And there's studies showing how those ones all heal all the diseases. So then isn't that funny how they've scared you once again of being afraid of something? And if a person has mold or candida or any types of issues like this in their body, they just got too many toxins. The body is trying to display something to tell you you got too many toxins, and it's trying to be the remedy to keep you alive. And it was interesting because I'll never forget when Ajana said about how certain things are in the body so that the actual thing, like the toxins or the metals or whatever it may be, don't actually take you out. Otherwise, they would seep into your organs and you would be gone like that. So the human body is absolutely miraculous. And through this journey, if I'm going to leave it with anything, everything is reversible. Anything you can think of, whether it's autism, whether it's autoimmune, lupus, I don't know, even your eyesight. I've watched people regenerate their eyes and they don't go to an eye professional anymore. Every single thing is reversible. Every single professional will tell you the opposite because they want you to be their patient for life. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. And through this journey, I would say, especially the last 5 years, it has blown my mind to see that you can reverse everything. And if we don't take initiative or try or make a move or get rid of Wi-Fi or do this or whatever, then we're just going to sit here and complain. And I can't do it anymore. I just want people to have solutions and move us forward. And if these things can help somebody, I hope that they can. But I hope that it can show, me and your conversation a different side, because this is cliff notes, like of me and you's research over time. But when you start to go through all of this, you just start picking away one thing. Where did this come from? Look this up, da 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 da, and you'll just find the rabbit hole. It's kind of like the whole nicotine push. You find BlackRock, you find Vanguard, you find all the same players involved. So just start looking up things like that. But on that note, yeah, it's just another beautiful day in this realm. That's all I can say.
Love that, man. This has been an amazing episode. Might be the first episode I send to people. To be honest, we've covered so much, given such a beautiful perspective. You're locked in. You have a really beautiful perspective. So we really appreciate the work that you do. We appreciate your time and energy coming on the podcast as per usual and conveying this message in such a easily digestible way. Your videos are amazing. So where can the listener learn more from you?
So you can find more on cultivateelevate.com. We have this will go up on there. It'll be in our blog section. And then I put up stuff on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Telegram, everywhere. I try to be everywhere. People don't realize how much this information is censored. Like you go to type in Cultivate Elevate. This is the greatest thing. I probably have 5,000 videos up online. You go to type in Cultivate Elevate in Google, you find 3. You find 3 from 2020. You don't even find the new ones anymore. You find 3 from 2020, like me talking about just eating mushrooms and things like that. So, just like I said, you might want to use different browsers than maybe the potential ones you're using to find the information. But I try to put it everywhere, and people can just go through the page, go to the search bar, and just search whatever topic you're looking for, because I want to have a solution to all the nonsense we face. And that's it.
Well, you do that really well. And if this stays up on the tube, it will be a miracle. But miracles happen all the time. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me on, brother.
Of course.
All right, I want to thank you all for listening. Before we wrap this up, we should all remember that this podcast is for informational purposes only, not medical or therapeutic advice, and this does not replace the advice from a qualified professional or practitioner. But also remember that we are sovereign, responsible beings capable of thinking, criticizing, and understanding absolutely anything and everything. We are together self-healer, self-governable, self-teacher, and so much more. And together with the greater forces, we can reclaim our health, clarity, sovereignty. Listen, I deeply appreciate every single one of you that took the time to listen to this podcast today. I hope you learned something. I hope you found it informative. If you did, give us that like, give us that share and a comment, rating and review. Make sure to subscribe and follow the show so you can join us along this journey. Check out the old podcast, YouTube videos, and check out the Beyond Terrain Academy if you want to go deep into actionable, distilled steps for you to improve your life. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episodes. You can reach me at any time on Instagram. Is probably the best spot, Beyond Terrain. I welcome your comments, critiques, criticisms, whatever it may be. I love to chat about this stuff. And do not forget, if you are ready to unlearn, to truly become the best version of yourself, to achieve your entire whole potential, sign into that Beyond Terrain Academy. It will be the last stop. I hope that you graduate with meaning, purpose, clarity, and you will never need another practitioner, another supplement, another protocol. After that, you will have simplicity, clarity, and meaning in your life. But as always, the mind is the only thing that can stop us from achieving this, because there are two types of people in the world. Those believe they can, those believe they can't, and they are both correct. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care.